Hi, everybody, and welcome back to CircuitCast with AI Connects and our hospitality series. Today, I have Tiffany Ross as my guest. Tiffany is a world-class operations and leadership executive. She's got over 15 years experience managing ultra-complex, multi-million dollar environments aboard some of the world's largest super yachts and on private estates. In those roles, she's led elite international teams, built precision systems for logistics, service delivery, risk management, always operating at the highest levels and supporting ultra high net worth families, celebrities, and global leaders. Her experience translates directly into scalable hospitality leadership, operational excellence, discretion, and a high performance business execution. Tiffany, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So Tiffany, that's a very interesting background, and maybe you can start off by just giving us a little bit of the story. I mean, how did you wind up on these multi-million dollar super yachts? What was your career trajectory, personal journey?
I started out working in hospitality when I was in high school. I got a job working at a front desk of a hotel when I was about 16, and then definitely decided hospitality was my focus for career, and then decided I wanted to get a degree in that. So in Canada at the time, they didn't have any 4-year university level degrees in hotel and restaurant management. So I applied to a few universities in the US and got accepted to United States International University in San Diego. So I spent my 4 years there, got my degree, incurred a very large debt from all the loans that I had to take out. And so when I moved back to Canada afterwards, I was working 2 full-time jobs in various hotels and restaurants. That led me to working at the Fairmont Banff Springs, where I was working with some girls from New Zealand, and their visa had expired, and they're like, we're going to go to France and, do our safety course, and we're going to get some jobs on boats. So I thought, well, this is a good way to do it for 6 months to a year, pay off some of my debt. And it's been almost 20 years now. I found my calling. I definitely paid off the debts and then some, managed to invest in properties. On a more personal level, I found an industry that just suited everything that I had been looking for, from the hospitality to the travel and working with people internationally abroad. So, yeah.
Yeah, and let's dig into that a little bit. I mean, you mentioned a little bit of it, but what is it that when you're working gets you out of bed in the morning? What is it that gives you that motivation to get excited about a brand new day?
I like positive stresses, so I enjoy the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. We try and create as much structure as possible within our environments. But when you're working, traveling from port to port and having guests turn around, arriving every day, new guests potentially, there's always unexpected things that happen. And I love taking those situations which could be catastrophic, but with your expertise and knowledge and experience in the industry, you find a way to make them a positive outcome for the guests. So it's those kind of stresses that I love, working with a team that just always has your back, and you work together with them, and you just provide this amazing environment for the guests.
That's great. So when you think about that, you mentioned, way back working in a front desk environment in a hotel. And obviously, you got to see some of the other way a hotel operates while you were doing that. Banff Springs, another example. When you think about the differences between a hotel guest experience and what it takes to serve that guest versus the very sort of unique and elite world that you've been working in with that guest and their guest experience and the service of that looks like.
Well, to be honest, they're actually quite similar at a higher level. And like the Fairmont being a high level of service hotel, you have, fine dining restaurants, you've got a world class spa. So, working in those environments, I was trained to work with a higher, more elite level. So, you understand how to communicate with them, what their expectations might be, and kind of gained that experience in how to deal with the unexpected at a higher level. And that just translates into to the yachting community, but just at a more elite level, I would say. Different scenarios, helicopter arrivals, last minute parties for 100 people. But the basic of hospitality is essentially the same.
Changing gears just a little bit, Tiffany, you and I have known each other for a few years. You mentioned to me one time something that sticks in my mind, and that was the experience of, being on deck or being on board and working, with the earpiece in and listening to the conversations of your staff and the crew in multiple languages at the same time, and the challenge of trying to parse that information. Talk about that a little bit.
On a boat that was based in Greece. So I'll just start by saying that technically every boat is supposed to have one operational language, and that's usually English. So, kind of as a law, everyone has to speak the same language because we're responsible for safety procedures. We fight fires, we deal with medical situations until, other people can be brought in. So, you'll have to have that safety level of that language. But when it comes down to it, people naturally go to their first language. So as a leader, I've had to be like, hey guys, none of that kind of, we're working in a professional environment. You can't be speaking a language that people don't understand. But at the same time, we're all international people in this environment. And you do need to allow people to have a bit of their home language. The chefs try and make foods from everyone's kind of, to make it feel more of a family and a community, because that's important for us to be able to feel comfortable with each other. Because it's not just, 9 to 5. We live and work together 24/7, and we need to work as a professional unit, but also as a family unit. So, yeah, I've worked with people from, every continent, and so they all have their own languages that they speak. But yeah, we do use English as the safety and communications language. Try to.
Right. So staying with the yachting world, it's a little bit unique in that even, say long haul flight service, right? Those people get off the airplanes and go and live somewhere occasionally, right? And when you and your crew are on board, it's quite a different sort of living arrangement. Talk a little bit about, what it's like to live on board for extended periods of time.
Well, and so I've been in the industry for almost 20 years now. And for the first 15, I didn't have what we call a rotational contract. So it was a permanent contract where you're employed for the full year and you get a certain amount of days allocated, which the captain would then approve based on the boat's itinerary and needs for you in that position. And so for the first 15 years, I did that. And then for about the past 5 years, I've been working on rotation, which means I work 8 weeks on and 8 weeks off. And that was a total game changer, especially when you're leading at this higher level, managing large teams. You can burn out quickly. So it's become a lot more competitive to offer these kind of rotations. But for the first 15 years of my career, I essentially lived on board for 10, 11 months of the year, living and working with the same people. So, I mean, I think I started to learn about living with internationally and accepting other cultures when I went to San Diego, because it was an international university there. And so I started to learn at that age. I was 18 when I moved there. Not everything is the Canadian way or the American way. There's different cultural things that you just have to accept and work with or lead around. So learning the cultural, expectations of people was already started, but became much more important when you're living 24/7 with these people on board. So I like to say that I was open to everyone. I think that open communication is important, and you need them to be seen and heard, because people are very different from, for example, even just like time zones. So there's some people that have like a 12-hour time zone difference or 6 hours to home. And so, they might be up in the middle of the night calling their family. You're sharing a cabin with these people. You have to create boundaries, but you also have to respect that these people have a life at home, and deserve to have their free time as their free time as well.
So you touched on something there that I wanted to mention and bring up. A lot of people imagine, they hear the word super yacht, right? And they think, oh man, that's just the lap of luxury, which they are, no question. But, I'm to understand, and many people wouldn't know necessarily, but that the cruise quarters aren't necessarily at the same level of luxury as what we see when we look at the boat from the outside.
Not so glamorous, no. The newer yachts these days, the boats are just getting bigger and bigger. When I first started in the industry, I think the largest boat was around 100 meters, and they're building 160, 180-meter yachts now. So boats are just getting bigger and bigger, which means more space for crew. And also mental health has become an important factor. And so there's actually laws that say your crew have to have space outside where they can get fresh air and sunlight. They have to have a place where they can do physical fitness. So these kind of things, as the industry has grown and expanded, have allowed for much better conditions on yachts. The bigger boats obviously have more space for that. Smaller boats, you might not see that as much. But yeah, we don't have the opulent, massive spaces. I mean, we're not swimming in the pools and we're not riding the jet skis, so ours is a more modest environment. But thankfully, the industry is moving to support crew and their environment. So they're getting better.
That's great insight. So let's go landside for a minute and talk
Oh,
about estates.
wow.
And the work that you've done there and how that differs from being on board a yacht on the water, or how it's the same.
You hope to provide the same level of service, but it's never feasible to do in that environment. Ours is, a 24-hour service and housekeeping on board the yachts, but in a villa, you have people that maybe you might have a few people that live on property, but a lot of the staff that work there are just locals. So they'll come in, do their shift, and go home. And, working internationally on yachts, we get to be selective. We can take people from all over the world with whatever work experience and education. Whereas the people that you work with are usually just people that live in that area that are seeking employment. So they may not be as passionate about their job, and I think that's the big difference in the level. The difference is that people that are in yachting are excited to be there. They're passionate about their jobs. Whereas leading the staff at a villa, some of them may love what they're doing as well, but a lot of it is just, this is a job for them to do.
So how do you, in that environment, how do you motivate those people to rise to the level of service, as the leader that you're hoping to aspire to in that villa?
I mean, you just train them to the best of your ability. You ensure that they have the tools that you would have on the yacht. And then you train them and you give them the opportunity. And, if they're not rising up to that level, then maybe it's not a right fit. And then you hopefully find someone that is. I think a lot of people, when given the opportunity to prove themselves and see what the experience can be at a yachting level, they definitely try. They're like, this is what we could be. This is great. Why wouldn't we want to be, providing the highest level? So I think most of the people do try.
And what about, provisioning, in a state versus a yacht? I mean, when the yacht, leaves port, right? Everything better be on board, where the estate has a little more freedom than that. Can you talk about that contrast?
Yeah, so I've done various regions of the world, spent most of my time in the Mediterranean, but I've done Caribbean seasons and I did a season in the South Pacific. So provisioning in Europe is easy. Every port basically in the Mediterranean is going to have kind of your international high level products that you need. Sometimes you have to import your wines, often from France or the UK, but it's very simple for provisioning there. The Caribbean, usually the boats will stop in the United States somewhere, do a big stock up and try and get as much as they can before heading to the Caribbean because it is much more expensive. You can find the items that you need there, but you're going to pay 2 to 3 times the price for it. Balancing the budget is a really important part of our job as well. And then I also did a season in the South Pacific, and that was just everything had to be imported. So we had to be very, very organized with our inventories. And because we would charter a plane from either Australia or New Zealand to bring products to us, depending on which islands we were in. And so when you're chartering a plane to bring in provisions, you need to make sure, that you aren't going to be missing out on things, but you don't want to be wasteful either because you pay by weight and time. So that was a fun season, was managing the inventories for the South Pacific.
Let's talk a little bit about the sort of hierarchy in the environment, both on the boat and in the estate. You're there as chief stew, and you've got a captain who's also got a role to play, different role. Talk a little bit about that.
So that's where the structure and the hierarchy is quite different because in a land-based estate or a villa, you're usually reporting directly to either the owner themselves or to the estate manager. And that's kind of a more direct line. But in on yachting, you report directly to the captain. The captain is overall responsible not just for the navigation, but for all of the crew, the safety, and everything. So it can create, conflicts sometimes when we have a duty to communicate to the captain, tell them what's going on. That might not be something that the owner or the guests, you know, want to be shared. If you find something in a cabin or you see something happening at a party, it's our obligation. And it's a lot more structured and strict in that regard. So yes, generally all heads of department report to the.
Right. So it also is a game of discretion, right? There are things that you're not obligated to report to the captain, and there are still things that you want to keep discreetly controlled, right?
Yeah, discretion is a huge part of our responsibility working for these elite people is obviously um, we sign a lot of NDAs as well. So
Yeah, yeah. Um, when you look forward, not just in your career, but in the industry in general, you mentioned the trend towards larger and larger yachts. Thinking about the state space as well. What do you see as sort of trends that are emerging in this industry segment?
I mean, besides the size of the vessels that are growing, there's been a lot of development for trying to make more sustainable vessels. A vessel is never going to be a green. I mean, they just use so much power and fuel, but they're trying to find alternate ways to leave less of an imprint on the environment. So there's been a lot of work, I'd say, in the past 5 to 10 years. They've launched a few of those vessels, and yeah, so it's about reducing consumption, making things energy efficient, and trying to be a little bit better to our world.
Does that same sort of ecological consciousness translate to the landside estates to the same degree? I mean, they don't come with the big stamp on them that says you use a lot of energy right out of the gate, right?
Yeah, I think it depends on who's managing the estate and what the owner feels about that, because that's a little bit more. It's less structured than the obligations that seafarers have to the environment, like we can't throw things overboard and that kind of thing. If you look at an estate in the United States versus, say, in Dubai, there'll be recycling and green energy initiatives probably for places in the United States, whereas in Dubai, they don't have that as much of the infrastructure. And I could be speaking out of turn. Maybe they do. I was just using that as an example where some countries have more of that green initiative than others.
So, I guess just one final question really is, uh, if you get a magic wand and you could fix something about the industry, what would it be?
I think the hardest challenge that I've dealt with, which I would like to see a change, is when staff or crew members have a position of power with the owner and abuse that.
Hmm.
And that really, really, especially on the yachting side of things, really affects the well being and mental health of all of the crew members because there's really not much that you can do about that. And so if I could wave my wand, it would be that there wouldn't be an abuse of power.
Okay, that's interesting.
Mm.
I suppose it has a little bit to do too with, with the contained environment, right? I mean, it's like a city of itself,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, interesting. Well, those are really all the questions I had for you. Is there anything, you'd like to ask me or talk about in general about the industry?
No, I think the only thing I would like to say is that I'm sure a lot of people, when they think of yachting now, they think of the show Below Deck. And there are some aspects of that are true, the long working hours, the charter guests asking for crazy things, but they're showing a side of it that isn't real. And so I just want to point out that there's a lot of people that come in thinking they're going to get that experience, and that's not what you're going to get. You're going to get a professionally run environment most yachts, and there's no space for drama on board. So whatever they see, all of that drama that erupts, that's not really going to happen. I mean, yes, people will get together and people will party and make mistakes, but there really isn't the space for drama on board. We want to work with professional people.
Great. That's actually a really good insight. I think it's pretty easy for people to see only one perspective, and
Yeah.
certainly the Hollywood perspective rarely tracks the real world, right? Okay, so Tiffany, so we've heard about your experience leading teams on yachts. We've heard about some of the, sort of the personal challenges that come with that, the environmental challenges, the unique aspects of the yachting world, and we've talked a little bit about the land side, the estate management side, and your experience there. I think these are all pretty interesting perspectives relative to lots of other parts of the hospitality space. So thank you very much for visiting us today, and I hope we'll be talking again soon.
Yes, thank you so much for your time today.